Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Charming a Fairytale Cowboy by Katie Lane, narrated by Holly Adams. Chapter 1. There was rich, and then there was filthy rich. As Shane Ransom stepped out of his beat-up Dodge pickup, he couldn't help staring in open-mouthed awe at the huge stone castle with its turrets that stretched up into the dark Texas night sky. So this was Bucking Horse Palace. When his brother had first mentioned the name the townsfolk had given the Kingman's house, Shane had laughed his ass off. But he wasn't laughing now. This was a palace fit for a king. After growing up in a rusty trailer with one bathroom, Shane couldn't help feeling envious. But one day he'd have his own castle on a hill, come hell or high water. "Hey, Reverend Ransom!" Shane turned to find a chubby teenager standing there grinning from ear to ear, the moonlight glinting off his braces. The greeting didn't surprise Shane. Folks confused him for his twin brother Chance all the time. But he was surprised by the kid's 10-gallon hat and gun in holster. Noting his confusion, the kid whipped out the plastic gun and fired a few caps into the air. "It's all part of my costume. I'm Hoss from the old TV show Bonanza. My grandma loves Hoss." Shane liked the kid on the spot, not only because he was a Bonanza fan, but also because he had wanted to make his grandma happy. "Grandmas should be catered to for the short time they are on this earth," he said, something Shane wished he'd learned sooner. The kid slipped the toy gun back in his holster. "If you give me your keys, I'll park your truck. The Kingmans don't want people parking in front." Shane tossed him his keys, and the kid gave him a valet stub. As he hopped behind the wheel, the teenager shook his head. "I thought a preacher would drive something fancier." Shane quoted a Bible scripture his grandma had always quoted whenever he asked for something they couldn't afford. "For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out." When the kid looked even more confused, Shane laughed. "You're right. It's a piece of shit truck." The kid's mouth dropped open in shock, and Shane should have told him he wasn't a preacher. But while Chance was a saint, Shane had always been a little bit of a devil. Pretending to be his brother was one of his favorite things to do, so he only winked before he headed toward the castle. At the huge oak front doors with their intricately engraved Ks, Shane rang the doorbell, then stood back to wait. When several minutes passed, he figured the doorbell couldn't be heard over the loud country music and laughter coming from the house, so he opened the door and stepped inside. The inside was as impressive as the outside. The foyer had polished marble floors and a high ceiling with a domed skylight. From the skylight hung a glistening chandelier with gold prancing horses intermingled with the dangling crystals. The foyer was filled with people all dressed in Western costumes. There was no way Shane was going to find his brother in this crowd. He pulled out his cell phone and texted Chance. "I'm here. Where are you?" A second later, his phone pinged with a reply. "Forgot to set the church alarm. Had to run back to town. Do not go inside until I get back." Dots appeared on the screen before another text came in. "I mean it, Shane. I don't want you causing any more confusion than you already have." Shane smiled as he texted back. "You know I live to confuse people." He could almost see his brother gritting his teeth. Shane figured he'd screwed with Chance enough and quickly texted again. "I'll wait for you out front." He pocketed his phone and went to leave when a woman's voice stopped him. "Reverend Ransom!" He glanced over his shoulder to see a short, stocky woman in an old-fashioned women's riding costume hurrying toward him. In the brown wig, it took him a moment to recognize Kitty Carson. When he did, he mentally groaned. Chance had wanted him to stay under the town's radar until he could officially introduce him. Unfortunately, Kitty was the town's radar. She not only delivered mail to the town of Cursed, Texas, she also delivered all its gossip. He pinned on a smile. "Well, hey, Miss Carson. How are you?" She put a hand on her hip and flashed a buck-toothed grin. "I'm Annie Oakley tonight. I wanted to be Miss Kitty from Gunsmoke, but the bridal attendants are all wearing saloon girl costumes." While he tried to figure out how a wedding fit into a charity ball, she gave him the once-over. "Casey from Yellowstone?" "Although that's not an old Western, and isn't his character a little violent for a preacher?" It looked like he was going to have to come clean. "I'm not really a preacher. I'm Chance's—" Before he could say brother, her eyes narrowed on something over his shoulder. "The gall of that woman. I'm glad you're taking over for Reverend Floyd. The man refused to do anything about Hester Malone. But I know you're not the type of man who will let a witch continue to practice her witchcraft in our godly town." Shane turned to see a tall, gray-haired woman in a flowing black dress talking with a man dressed like John Wayne. Hester Malone was the town fortune-teller and palm reader. While Shane didn't believe in that kind of hocus-pocus, he had to admit the woman was intuitive. She was the only one who had seen through the twin switch Shane had pulled. Even now, when she glanced over, her eyes narrowed. Of course, that could have to do with Kitty. The two women did not get along. "See what I mean?" Kitty said. "She's trying to curse me with her evil eye right now. If that isn't the sign of a witch, I don't know what is." Before he could figure out how to reply to such craziness, Kitty ducked into the large room off the foyer. Shane glanced back at Hester. The woman did have a penetrating stare. When she started toward him, he figured now was a good time to duck out like Kitty. Once outside, he glanced around. To the right of the castle was an elaborate garden with all kinds of trees, plants, flowers, and a quaint cottage that looked like it came right out of a storybook. Granny Ran would have loved it. She might have lived in a rusted old trailer, but she had grown the most beautiful flowers and biggest vegetables at the trailer park. With some time to kill before Chance got there, he decided to take a stroll in the garden. The path was lined with bronze statues of the championship horses raised on the ranch. There were quite a few. Shane stopped to read the names of each horse before he came to the stone steps at the end of the path. He followed them down to a hedge maze. As a kid, he hadn't been able to afford expensive video games, but his grandmother had gotten him and Chance a Pac-Man game at a thrift store. Chance hadn't cared for it, but Shane had loved getting that munching dot through the maze, so he didn't hesitate to enter the labyrinth. He was somewhere in the middle when he noticed the sound of trickling water. He followed it to a break in the hedge. When he stepped through, the sight that greeted him took him by surprise. It was a secret garden, complete with a lush lawn, vibrant spring flowers, a beautiful tile fountain with cascading water, and a garden fairy. Although the woman who sat on the edge of the fountain with her feet dangling in the moonlit pool of water didn't look like a fairy as much as a siren. Her red saloon girl dress was hiked up to her knees, showing off shapely legs. Her dark curls fell around her shoulders, playing peekaboo with the soft swells of her breasts above the low-cut neckline. As he watched from the shadow of the hedge, she tossed something into the fountain and paused for a moment. Then she reached for the bottle of champagne sitting on the ledge next to her and took a deep swig. She set the bottle down and released a long sigh. "Some ball, Carl. I didn't even get asked to dance once." Shane glanced around for a man, but all he saw was a mean-looking goat munching on some red roses. The woman splashed her feet in the fountain. "I mean, is it too much to ask for a man who has enough guts to ask me to dance?" Shane moved out of the shadow of the hedge and took off his cowboy hat. Beautiful women are intimidating. The woman startled and placed a hand on her chest. Jesus! He was about to apologize for scaring her when her eyes widened. You? He thought she had mistaken him for his brother, until she continued. You're the cowboy I kissed at Nasty Jack's bar. Now he was the one surprised. He stepped closer and studied her features in the moonlight. You're the pool-playing cowgirl? The one who took all my money? She pulled her feet out of the fountain and stood. I didn't take it. You bet it. After you conned me into it. She sent him the sassy smile that had haunted his dreams for the last few months. All's unfair in love and pool. Shane laughed. Suddenly, coming to the Kingman ranch so his brother could introduce him to the townsfolk of Cursed wasn't such a waste of time. He remembered the night at the only bar in town. He remembered it well. It wasn't because a girl had bested him at pool. It was because after besting him, she had followed him outside and kissed him like no woman had ever kissed him before. He'd wanted more, but the old guy who ran the bar had chased him off with a gun. Still, Shane had thought about that night often, and wondered what would have happened if the old man hadn't shown up. Now he had a chance to find out. If her smile was any indication, she was as happy to see him as he was to see her. So what are you doing here? She asked. I was supposed to meet my brother at the cowboy ball, but he's running late, so I thought I'd take a look around the infamous Kingman Ranch. And what do you think? It's more over the top than I thought it would be. I mean, who builds a castle on a Texas ranch? Her eyes narrowed. Maybe a man who can afford to. So she was just like the rest of the town. The townsfolk of Cursed thought the Kingmans could do no wrong. He understood. From what his brother had told him, the Kingman Ranch employed half the town and helped support the other half. He held up his hand. I didn't mean any offense. A castle just seems a little odd for a ranch. She relaxed and reached out to pet the goat that now didn't look mean as much as love-struck. It looked up at the woman with big, adoring eyes as she spoke. I guess it is pretty odd. And wasteful. The money could have been spent on better things. Like goats. She laughed. Yes? So, what are you doing out here when there's a ball going on in a castle? He hesitated. I don't believe for a second that no one asked you to dance. She turned the goat toward the break in the hedge and patted its butt. Go on now, Carl. You shouldn't be in here eating the roses. When the goat was gone, she looked back at Shane. It's true. The only ones who asked me to dance were my brothers. He studied her features in the moonlight. Her hair was as black as a moonless night. Her nose had a cute little tilt on the end. She had the kind of mouth that easily smiled and expressive eyes that couldn't lie. Right now, they held a sadness that touched his heart. Then you have a town of dumbasses. He set his cowboy hat on the fountain ledge and held out his hand. May I have this dance, miss? She lifted her eyebrows. With no music? He cocked his head. There's music. Don't you hear it? The crickets sound a little off-key, but the trickling water is as pitch-perfect as any country ballad. There was a moment when he thought she'd decline. Then she took his hand. She wasn't a small woman. Even shoeless, she was only half a head shorter than he was in his boots, but she seemed to fit perfectly in his arms. She smelled good, not like perfume or lotions and hair products. Her scent was simple, clean soap and something earthy. If the tan on her arms was any indication, she spent a lot of time outdoors, at something that took physical strength. Her arms had definition. He started to ask her what she did for a living, but then stopped himself. The thought of keeping his mystery girl a mystery was titillating. He waltzed her around the fountain. The 5th time around, he spun her under his arm before lowering her into a dip. When he set her back on her feet, she swayed, and he placed a hand on her waist to steady her. "You okay?" She nodded. "The spinning just made me a little dizzy." "Are you sure it's not the champagne?" "I didn't drink that much. It was almost empty by the time I got here." He grinned. "So you're only slightly drunk?" "More like slightly buzzed, but not enough that I couldn't lay you out if you tried something I didn't like." His gaze locked with hers. At the bar, her cowboy hat had shadowed her eyes so he hadn't been able to tell their color. Now he knew they were a startling blue that reflected the moonlight like twin mountain lakes. In them, he saw the exact need that ate at him, a need for something more. Shane lowered his head. "In that case, I'll only do things you like." Chapter 2. Delaney Kingman's wish had come true. Not the wish she'd made when she tossed the penny into the fountain. She would never waste a fountain wish on a man. But the wish she'd made every day after being kissed at her uncle's bar. Hester Malone had been right. Delaney's mystery cowboy had returned. And his kisses were twice as good as she remembered. He didn't kiss her with little pecks like John Mumford in 3rd grade, or awkward mouth bumps like Anthony Bacca's behind the high school bleachers, or sloppy devouring like Eddie Jones at the 4th of July hoedown, although Eddie had been drunk as a skunk. This man took his time, with skilled, gentle pulls of his lips and soft sweeps of his tongue. His hands rested at her corseted waist, his thumbs strumming back and forth over the satin of her dress like the hands of a clock ticking off the time until they would move. Finally, they did move. One hand slid around to cradle her butt cheek, and one slid up to cradle her breast. No man had ever touched her like this, and her breath hung suspended in her chest as he reshaped her with his hot palms and agile fingers. It was hard to describe the feelings that rocked her. She felt tingly and energized, and, at the same time, weak-kneed and limp. She had never been a weak-kneed kind of woman, and the strange, languid feeling scared her. What if she had bitten off more than she could chew? What if she wasn't ready for this kind of intense passion? She drew back from the kiss and rested her forehead on his chin, trying to stabilize her off-balance emotions. He released her breast and bottom and lifted her chin until her gaze met his. He had pretty eyes. They were the deep brown of a sorrel mare and held a gentleness that was more animal than human. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. "Maybe I should drive you home." The night of their first kiss, he hadn't known she was a Kingman, and it looked like he still didn't. But if he had been invited to the cowboy ball by his brother must know her family. And all it would take was the right question to figure out her identity, which meant she would never get this opportunity again. Once he learned she was the overprotected sister of the Kingman brothers, he would run for the hills. No man wanted to go up against her 3 brothers or the Kingman power and wealth. She couldn't see this man being any different. If she wanted more of his knee-weakening kisses, she only had this one chance. Was she going to let a little fear keep her from finally seeing what sex was all about? She shook her head. "I don't want to go home." She burrowed her fingers through his thick, wavy hair and drew his mouth back to hers. This time, she took charge of the kiss, molding her lips to his and delving her tongue into the warm recesses of his mouth. He tasted rich and decadent, like dark chocolate. She loved dark chocolate, almost as much as she loved the way he gave her free rein to kiss him like she wanted to. He didn't try to duel with her tongue or fight for dominance with his lips. He just followed her lead as his hand stroked her back in a soothing up-and-down caress. Their kisses grew deeper and more intense, as did the need building inside her. Soon kissing wasn't enough. She wanted more. Much more. She reached for the open neck of his western shirt and tugged open the snaps. She must have tugged a little too hard because a ripping sound rent the air. She drew back and looked down at his torn shirt. She would have apologized if she hadn't been so distracted by the body beneath the tattered edges of cotton. His shirt wasn't the only thing ripped. His body was, too. Unable to stop herself, Delaney slipped her hand beneath the opening. His stomach muscles jumped as her fingers grazed them, probably because her hand was cold compared to the heat of his body. She held them against his warm skin until they heated before trailing her fingertips up the center indentation between his abs. When she reached the hollow of his throat, she slid her hands across his collarbone and pushed the shirt off his shoulders. Her breath escaped her lungs in a huff of surprise and appreciation. She had seen half-naked men before. The ranch hands were always running around without their shirts on. And a time or two, she'd caught them running around with much less. She had looked. Who wouldn't? Some of those cowboys had been pretty hot. But not one of them had made her feel the way she felt now. Breathless. Awed. And a wee bit intimidated. It wasn't just the multitude of tanned muscles, although those were nice. It was the mixture of his muscles and the sprinkling of chest hair and the white scar that ran along the joint of his shoulder and the tattoo of a royal flush poker hand on his right bicep. His body told a story, and Delaney couldn't help wanting to read it with her fingertips. She traced the puckered scar on his shoulder. "What's this?" "I tore my rotator cuff playing high school basketball and had to have surgery." "And this?" She outlined the A of the ace of diamonds on the round curve of his bicep. "A college friend talked me into it after too much tequila." "And you regret it?" His voice was like rough velvet when he spoke. "I usually don't regret much." She lifted her gaze from his tattoo to find him watching her with an intensity that was almost like a physical touch. Then he did touch her. His finger moved slowly and feather-soft along the elastic neckline of her saloon girl dress. It dipped into her cleavage for a breathless moment before sliding back out and coming to a stop on the swell of her right breast. She read the question in his deep brown eyes. "Do you want to keep going?" It was a good question. Part of her was scared, but the other part was tired of being the Kingman Princess who had been put on a pedestal no man could reach. To this man, she was just a woman he desired. Even if it was just for one night, Delaney intended to release all the baggage that came with being a Kingman and enjoy the passion of this man. "Don't stop," she whispered as she pulled his lips to hers. Their kisses grew hotter and more intense. As he manipulated her desire with his tongue and mouth, his hand pushed down the neckline of her dress and caressed the swells of her breasts above her strapless bra. While she was focused on that magical touch, his other hand unclasped her bra. Once it was gone, he encased her in his large, warm hand, and everything inside her melted like a wax candle held to a torch. A second later, that melted wax was set aflame when he brushed his thumb over her nipple. And he wasn't finished. After he had her nipple tight and achy, he drew back from their kiss and dipped his head to her breast. The feel of him sucking her into his hot, wet mouth had sparks exploding through her body into a cascade of lust and need. "Oh!" she breathed as she furrowed her fingers through his hair to hold him exactly where he was. He continued to suckle and lick until she trembled with the force of sensations skittering through her. She wanted more than just his mouth on her breast. She needed more. She tugged his head up and kissed him, hiking her leg around his lean hips and drawing him to the part of her that throbbed for release. He drew back from the kiss and spoke against her lips. "Easy, sweetheart." "I don't want easy." She nipped at his bottom lip. "I want you, and I want you now." His eyes flickered with surprise before they turned to liquid heat. "Where do you want me?" He bunched up the full skirt of her dress and pressed his fingers against her wet panties, causing her breath to suck in. "Here? Do you want me here?" Her reply came out choked and strangled. Please." He quickly slipped her panties off her hips. Then his fingers returned to tease and explore until she moaned deep in her throat and swayed on her feet. Just when she thought she would drop to the ground in a whimpering puddle, he scooped her into his arms and carried her to the fountain. He sat down and arranged her on his lap, facing away from him, with her dress hiked up and her legs hooked on either side of his muscled thighs. She was totally exposed to the cool night air, but she didn't care when he touched her with his skilled fingers, exploring and delving before he settled into a rhythm that made her lean her head back on his shoulder and moan with pleasure. With each stroke of his fingers, she became more and more mindless. The orgasm that broke over her in waves was so intense she thought she might black out. Once it was over, he guided her back to reality with gentle strokes and encouraging words. "I got you, sweetheart. I got you." When she sagged against him, he adjusted her legs, lowered her dress, and tucked her against his warm chest. "You good?" "Mm-hmm." She burrowed closer. If she could have climbed into his skin, she would have. She rested there, enjoying the feeling of being in his arms, until two things came to her attention: a pinging noise and the throbbing hardness beneath her bottom. She lifted her head. "But you're not good." He grinned. "I think if we want to go further, we're going to need a bed. This stone ledge isn't exactly comfortable." She blinked. "So we're not having sex?" "Oh, we're having sex. Just not tonight." He gave her a quick kiss before he lifted her to her feet and stood. "I have to meet my brother." He flashed her a smile. "But if you want to wait for me, we could go back to your place later." She shook her head. "That won't work. Now. We need to have sex now. Otherwise, I might not get another chance." She reached for the button of his jeans and tugged it open. But before she could pull down his zipper, he stopped her. "Hey, now. We'll get another chance to be together." He took her chin in his hand and lifted her gaze to his. "I promise you." "No, we won't. Take my word for it. It's now or never." "Never say never." He kissed her deeply, cradling her breast in his hand and cupping her bare bottom under the skirt of her dress. just as she was starting to think that maybe...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?